I will talk briefly today about the work I have been doing at the council along with my colleagues for the last 4 years. I have been working on steel, I have been working a little bit on natural gas, on green hydrogen, so here and there. And by no means am I a distinguished expert, as Sir said. I am only 4 years into my career, so I'm grateful to Swati ma'am for actually calling me here, but I would like to on behalf of my organization, I would like to talk about what the industry looks like today and where the industry can go and what it can and cannot do. So my organization, I work for the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is based in New Delhi. It is a public policy think tank. It is a not-for-profit research organization whose mandate is to impact sustainable development at scale with data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach. So I work in the industrial sustainability team, which is part of our transformations vertical. We have a lever focusing on quality of life and another lever focusing on the enablers for both of these pretty much. We are now 250 plus. We've grown a lot since I joined 4 years ago when we were only 60 people. So that sort of talks about the sort of appetite the country has for research on policy and on the intersection of technology and policy that is needed to inform governments, because governments at this stage do not have the capacity within them in most cases to do all this work by themselves. Okay, so steel industry in India. It is the second largest in the world. I apologize if you can't read the text, but I'll just tell you what it is. It's the second largest industry in the world, like a distant second to China, but it is fairly substantial. It has 150 million tons per year of production capacity, of which 20 million tons was produced in the year 21-22. And the critical point here is that government as well as the industry expects this capacity to double in just the next 10 to 15 years. So that's a huge amount of capacity addition. And there's a huge amount of decisions that need to be made regarding what technologies we adopt and how this industry going forward will decarbonize. As of today, there are 4 major routes of steel making in India. 5 if you count the use of scrap-based steel making. They are the 4 that are mentioned in the table. Basically, there are 2 different technologies for iron making and 2 different technologies for steel making. For iron making, you have the blast furnace process, which is basically going to melt your ore, drive out the oxides, and you get iron as a result. The second is the direct reduction process, in which case you heat ore to a high temperature, and in a reducing atmosphere, it is going to remove the oxides, and you'll end up with iron. They are kind of similar, but slightly different processes. The blast furnace process is mainly used by large-scale industries because it is huge in capacity and requires a lot of capital investment, because there are lots of allied processes that are needed to produce steel through the blast furnace process. The DRI industry is comprised of much smaller plants. There are 288 DRI plants versus only 50 plants that have blast furnaces. That says something. Similarly for steel making, BF plants are usually associated with a basic oxygen furnace, whereas DRI plants are also associated with electric furnaces. So the EAF is an electric arc furnace, and the IF is an induction furnace. I'm not going to go too much into the technicalities, but the thing is that there are 52 blast furnace plants and 18 BOF plants in the country, whereas there are 288 DRI plants and 850 induction furnaces in the country. And if you look at the emissions intensity that we have calculated, the DRI-IF, which is basically most of the plants in the country, have the highest emission intensity, and they contribute about 30% of the production. So it's not only the big players that we have to try and wrestle into a decarbonization pathway, but it's the much smaller people that own 30% of the production in the country, which is going to be very difficult because they don't have access to capital, they don't have access to resources, they don't have access to R&D either. So this is very difficult for decarbonizing that industry specifically. On the right, the chart looks a little bit confusing, but it basically shows you iron going to steel and which technology it is linked with. So blast furnaces mainly produce, the iron coming from blast furnaces mainly goes to BOF. The iron produced from coal-based DRI goes mainly to induction furnaces, and there's a small amount of capacity that is using gas. And the reason why it's interesting is that gas-based iron making is much lower in emission intensity. You can see that it's around 1.6 to 1.9, whereas 2.5 to 3 for the rest of them. But we only have a very small amount of capacity. I'll get to why that is. Lastly, we do use 25 million tons of scrap in various types of steelmaking routes. In BOF and EAF steelmaking and also coal DRI IF, they use a little bit of scrap in the steel making process, usually 10 to 15%. But there are lots of sort of informal small industries across the country which only operate induction furnaces. Basically, they collect scrap, like your local scrap collector will collect it, sell it to them. They'll remelt it and make some low quality of steel for smaller purposes. This is also an interesting feature. Now, how can this industry decarbonize? So as we already saw on the last slide, most of the capacity, like 80 to 85% of the capacity is based on coal. And how can coal-based capacity decarbonize? You can see, is a much more complicated process than how a gas-based capacity can decarbonize. And that is also a little bit more complicated than how you can decarbonize by recycling. So in the first one, for existing capacity that is coal-based and also with new capacity that is coal-based, there are lots of things, intermediate steps you need to do before you get to clean steel. And the chief among which is CCUS. I mean, we have talked about why CCUS is controversial. Well, let me tell you why it's going to get even more controversial. It's because 150 million tons of capacity right now, and in the future of the capacity that I said would double, right? Of that, 120 million tons are going to be coal-based because steel manufacturers are saying they have already placed orders for blast furnaces and they're going to double their capacity with coal. So we're looking at almost 70 million tons of coal-based capacity by the year 2030. If you put coal-based capacity, that is blast furnace technology, around 55% of your emissions reductions will need some kind of carbon capture technology to go to net zero. Because there is nothing else, there is no energy efficiency measure, there is no amount of renewable power, and there are very little amount of alternative fuels that you can actually put into this type of process because the design simply doesn't support full decarbonization. So by putting coal into the ground now, coal-based technologies into the ground, we are going to lock in our dependence on coal. And the reason why this is even more problematic is that the BF technology we spoke about, they import about 80% of their coal because the coal available in India is not of good enough quality for them to produce steel at an economic rate. So they import it mostly from Australia. And even the DRI plants, the smaller scale ones, only about half of them use coal that is produced domestically. The rest of them imported from abroad. So there's a high import dependency for the steel sector, and that is problematic because of its reliance on coal even into the decades going forward. And it's going to cost a lot to decarbonize it as well. CCUS, if you specify current costs of CCUS, it will take 21 lakh crore for existing capacity alone to decarbonize. Even if CCS costs like almost halve in the next, let's say, 10 or 15 years, the capex will come down from 21 to only 14 lakh crore, which is still a huge amount of money. And with existing capacity, if you try to make green steel by using energy efficiency, CCUS and so on, green steel from existing technologies could be 40 to 70% more expensive considering current prevailing prices of carbon capture. If the carbon capture technology improves and we have done enough exploration of resources and we're like, oh, we're ready to put CO2 into the ground, even if we reach that stage, it'll still be 20% more expensive. So it's fairly problematic if we think about the coal-based route in terms of the next 50 years that these plants are going to last as to how they're going to decarbonize. The second approach, establishing new capacity that is based on natural gas. Well, the natural gas, the companies that make natural gas-based furnaces today are already saying that their furnaces are capable of blending green hydrogen from any concentration from 30 to 70%. They say they can blend it with minimal modifications. And they're saying with some design changes, they can get to 100% green hydrogen. And this is something that is being tested in various plants, including one in Sweden. So the green steel model basically will use existing technology that is already available and then progressively blend green hydrogen going towards the future. And with the use of green hydrogen and renewable power, we can produce clean steel. So the interesting part about this technology is that, one, it already exists. Two, it is already in operation in limited capacity in India. Three, we can use natural gas, which is an available fuel. Four, we can go to hydrogen when it is available. Now, this is a bit of a complicated chart to explain, but I will try to do it as best as I can. If we start putting in gas-based furnaces today and run them on hydrogen. Like, let's say that we run them on hydrogen produced from natural gas through SMR, as it is commonly known. It is a very popular technology for producing hydrogen from natural gas. If we run furnaces today, it will cost, on the right side, whatever you see, it's around $500 per ton of crude steel is what it will cost. But if we continue using SMR-based hydrogen, and we start blending more and more RE, as Mr. Soumya said, RE is much cheaper. So we already get to, from 500, we get to 450. And then, if you look at the gray bars, which is the expected cost of green hydrogen in the future, if, let's say, by 2040, we start blending green hydrogen into the gas-based shaft furnace, the price that you see is going to come down to about 400, even at a 95% blend of green hydrogen. That means this technology may be problematic in the near term because of issues with gas prices, but it's much more future-proof. And if we are able to produce green hydrogen at scale in India at the prices which manufacturers are claiming that they will reach, we will be able to produce price-competitive steel using the gas-based pathway in the next 15 to 20 years, which is a very short period of time considering how slow technology progresses on the ground. The third option, which is using more scrap. As I said, we already use about 25 to 30 million tons of scrap. However, we still have to import 5 million tons of scrap to achieve this number, because the main problem with scrap in India today is logistics. People are saying that, oh, it will cost me more to procure scrap than to make my own iron. That's how much scrap is expensive. It's because you need to collect it from various sources, aggregate it, and then transport it to various plants around the country. And another problem with the scrap-based pathway is that as an economy that is growing, as a consumerist economy that is growing, we are going to consume more and more. And that means that the amount available that goes into recycling is always going to be less than the amount that we consume. So it is a very important pathway for the circular economy aspect, but the scrap-based pathway alone can't meet our demand. However, it is the easiest to decarbonize, because as I said, we already use a lot of electric furnaces. So as long as the electricity is clean, your steel that is going to be nearly net zero emissions. So this poses us three questions. How are we going to grow? As I said, there are already 150 million tons of orders for blast furnaces, which means we are going to grow with coal. But that means we can't produce clean steel even in 50 years if we don't have any CCUS, and we have next to no CCUS in the country. We don't even have a policy for CCUS. We have nobody that is going on the ground exploring where we can put CO2 underground. We have very few pilots that are talking about carbon capture use, which is basically capturing CO2 and producing some other product with it. And as far as resources go, there are theoretical estimates that even we have studied that there is a lot of potential for underground storage. But again, as Mr. Soumya mentioned, lots of risks. Is it a contiguous resource? Is it like parcels in the ground that are not connected? Is it stable? What are the other challenges? Is there water table above that could get contaminated? There are so many things. And even if we start researching properly CCS now, it will still take 20 years before we even start injecting CO2. So that's the huge challenge. The second, should we just, instead of coal, build gas-based capacity? Well, gas prices are too high, so nobody wants to take the risk. But if they did, their long-term future would be secure because this technology can already go towards hydrogen. And the third option, prioritize scrap-based steelmaking. Definitely, as many people are doing. There's even a plant in Karnataka that is already producing clean steel because they are getting scrap, putting it in an electric furnace, and purchasing RE to run it. So they are producing clean steel already through the scrap-based pathway, so it's easily proven. As I said, however, our consumption far exceeds the quantity available for recycling. And the recycling that is done currently is mostly by the small-scale industries. So you can't expect them to purchase RE plants across the country and run their plants off of solar. They will say, oh, we will become clean when the grid goes clean. So that is the other challenge that the industry is facing. I will end with that. These are some of our publications from which I got the data from for this presentation. So I encourage you to please go and read them, and would like to hear feedback from y'all as well. Thank you.